Oh,
So
okay.
first, we kind of backtrack to a bit what.
Saint Agathe?
We're Senegal now. We're talking about bathing.
Right.
Okay. Now, when we get up in the morning, Robert, when we get up in the morning, uh, you know, to get dressed, you had to get dressed under your nightgown. I mean, I could do that real good. You could wash under your nightgown and dress on your nightgown. When you took your nightgown off the top of your head, you were fully dressed there. That's how we had to do it. And when we took a bath, never took a shower. I don't know why they had showers, just except for trying to drown those little kids that had wet the bed. And that's all. I don't ever remember. Well, of course, I went there to the 8th grade. I don't know what the high school girls did. But it wasn't a sanitary. It wasn't, there was no, they never showed us how to be clean about ourselves. I mean, we couldn't, like Leopold, Jean-Louis says, couldn't even touch us. You couldn't wash yourself. How did we wash our private parts? Did we? Well, you did because you were sinning. You were making a big sin.
I was sinning, but the times were that, again, it must have come through church teaching somehow. At least, again, not all over the place, but in certain areas, or either certain groups of nuns or priests and whatever, a lot of things were sin. Emphasis was placed on sinning rather than on good deeds, I think.
Yeah. Oh, I believe that.
Anything that you did, talking back to nuns or your parents, or scolding with your brother or sister, stealing little things, pennies, walking out with penny candy out of a store, everything seemed to have been a major sin.
And bad thoughts. Bad thoughts is a big to-do thing.
How do you get kids or adults to avoid any kind of so-called bad thoughts? Thoughts that are,
well, you know,
envious of somebody, or you know, wanting a woman, wanting a man, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, but that was
never. I
never.
think we all go through that, but everything was a sin.
And oh yeah, and now today, a lot of those sins are just. I mean, I know we were forgiven.
No, accepted.
Well, yeah, but I think it was the time, and I can remember, can just imagine what it was like for our mothers, your mother and mine, what it was like when they were alone in that convent there in Wallagrass, and their mother was away, just the two of them, and Ulysse was just, he was young then too when she left him. That was in 40, she was 42. I forget how old he was. My mother was 12 when she died, and he was only 10. And your mother she was 5 years older. So he was just a little kid when he was in there too, and that must have been horrific. I mean, nuns, I don't know where they learned this thing, but I think it stems from way back. It's the generation before that. Nobody ever exposed their bodies. Nobody ever, it was almost like cave living, I think, some of it. Really.
I remember preparing for confession. They would do the whole class together.
Oh,
this was primarily with nuns. I didn't have this with the lay teachers, but the nuns would prepare us for confession. The priests would come to the convent. This when I was in Eagle Lake, this is grammar school before I even got to St. Ignace, but the nuns in St. Agathe did the same thing. And they prepare the whole class by going through a whole list of sins. I mean, I never heard of so many sins in my life. Maybe I committed a few of them, but we would hear at least 50.
Oh, was that right?
We'd get in there, and then you had to keep track of how many you did.
They probably
you were guilty of.
Yes, and they probably told us the same. I'm sure they did with us too, because we used to have a big meeting, like Saturday morning. There was always a big meeting, or so everybody gathered in the same room, and they always had told you things, and I think that's probably when they prepared us for that confession thing too.
But because it was expected.
But
that's
what.
I don't know about your experience, but I would look at my whole experience in the private schools as good ones.
Oh,
there
yeah.
were some negative things, but they were.
Oh, well, I had good ones.
They were good experiences. I
had good ones in my freshman and sophomore year. That was 2 good years. I'm very glad I went to Burton and Melda's for those 2 years, because Burton and Melda were very good to me. And you know, coming out of a convent and not learning from the nuns, obviously, you don't learn the culture, the outside culture from them. You just learn what's there and what they have to give you, and they may have academic knowledge, but not everyday life. They didn't have that to give you. And at home, when I went home, my mother was so happy to see me. I mean, she never reprimanded me about anything. I mean, she was happy that I was there with them. So when I went to Burton and Melders, I was a freshman and a sophomore, and I really learned a lot from those two. And of course, being in a big city, and can you imagine coming out of a convent, going to a public high school? That was, woo. I mean, and and you were exposed to Protestants? Well, I mean, they are people. I mean, that was.
What were they taught? What was? You're saying they are people when you went to public school. That's what you realized. But when you were at the private school, what were you taught of other people outside of your religion? What was ground into you?
You avoided them, and you would never have entered one of their churches because you probably would have been excommunicated.
No.
I mean,
We never had any around us. Soldier Pond never had any Protestants. Did you have any in Eagle Lake?
We had a Jewish family and probably one Protestant family.
And we had one Protestant man, and his family was all Catholic. So we were never exposed. But we were under the belief that Protestants, they all went to hell. I mean, we were the only ones going to heaven. Of course, if you didn't make all those sins, and you didn't forget anything in confession, and you lived a perfect life. But I was always under that impression, and I remember in Connecticut finding out, some of these people that I met that were Protestant, and they were nice people. I mean, they were living good lives. They weren't sinful, or that was a rude awakening for me.
My biggest problem was going 2 years of private grammar school in Santa Gat, my 4 years in Bedford, was loneliness.
Lonely?
Lonely.
Oh,
being the last of a big family, of course, they eventually all left before I left. But probably during the day when you had classes and afternoons when there were activities, playing ball, whatever the case may be, getting involved in piano lessons and plays, evenings were, for me, very difficult. I agree with you, I think the days were very good. But evenings, I miss my dog. I certainly miss my parents. We didn't have TV at home, but the comforts of home, of sitting with mom and dad when they listened to the radio, going to church with people that you knew, and even through high school. I mean, that was my biggest problem. I would leave home sometimes in tears, knowing that it was a good thing. Mom was so concerned about having us get a good education and good instruction that she thought that sacrifice was worth it. I would agree with that today, but it was difficult. Loneliness was really difficult.
Yeah, I found that 2 days before I was to leave to go to school, my mother didn't talk to me barely, just barely. I mean, she was, today I think about it and it makes me sad. But then I was too young, whatever it was, to realize what she was going through. She wasn't happy about the situation, about her kids having to leave her. She was left alone. Both kids, even my brother went away to school. All those years. He went to Santa Gat, and then he also went to Biddeford for 4 years. And so I think that was a very sad time for her. Definitely was. For me, as I said, and then I've learned to keep my my emotions in. You don't show your emotions at the convent. You don't show that you're weak. You don't cry. So that's something that I have been able to control, and I think it's from those experiences. You don't go into a room, after leaving your parents or your father crying. No way. Nobody's going to see you do that. Did you feel that way?
Yeah, but it was tough.
It was. It wasn't easy. And I remember, too, we're going to keep you going all day. I remember in Lewiston, in Sabattis, one Thanksgiving, Jackie and Maripol had been invited to Harold's house for Thanksgiving weekend. And I was the only one left at the convent. Now, that was not a good weekend. So anyway.
What did you do during that weekend by yourself? You were the only one left there.
I don't know. I don't remember. Sometimes there are things you don't like, and you don't, how would I want to say it? No, it's not, like something that, an experience you don't want to relive. I'm that way. I can take it out of my head and back there, and I won't remember it unless you put me under hypnosis. That might come back.
But it shows how it affected you because you have feelings to this day about that.
Oh, it does. I did.
It's way down.
But when Jackie and Maripal were there, that was fine because, you know, there was always someone to interact with. But as I said, the younger nuns, apparently some of those nuns must have done something with me, keep me occupied. I'm sure they did. Because I remember playing hide and go seek in that stupid barn of theirs. And under the barn is where the manure all was laying in. Nobody would hide there but me. I could go hide in there.
But in spite of that,
Hey, here
and
we
I know
are.
we have hard feelings. It's a good life today.
Well, it's okay. You know, I'm not the worse for it. And what would have happened to me if I had stayed in Soldier Pond all those years and went to 8th grade to Soldier Pond? Who knows what would have happened there? And then I would have had to do high school in Fort Kent. They would have had to transport me somehow or board me in Fort Kent because they didn't have a high school in Soldier Pond. So I'm thankful for everything my parents did for me. Really.
So am I.
They did the best they could with what they had. They didn't have much to start with.
Right.
No, because when my mother took sick, your mother had to give up her job. Matan had to give up her job in Washington to come live in Lewiston, and she lived at the Y while my mother was in the sanitarium. Now, she did that for her sister. I mean, she was very protective of my mother. I mean, for her to have done that, and that was when she was going out with, you know, Fred. Because in my mother's diary, she mentions that, she says, she doesn't say Cecilia, she says, my sister is getting married today. I forgot the date, but my mother then at that time had been cured or was in remission from her tuberculosis. My mother had tuberculosis. And she was living in ma tante Cecile's room or whatever it was she had at the Y in Lewiston. So they were very, I think those two were very close. Well, that's all they had. They just had each other. See, that was a small family.
Luke, I think we've emptied ourselves.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm at the end of this tape too.
Oh, that's good. Jeez, I'm going to take this one.